In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
I am here with a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Cristine Hull. And usually this is a paranormal podcast. This one is more on mental health with kind of a twist of the paranormal. And Cristine has really been there, done that in terms of the ups and downs of what a lot of her clients have gone through. And she's got a fascinating story and a fascinating story arc as well. So welcome to the show, Cristine. Excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. This is a little different vibe than the regular show. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it'll come out great. I mean, I saw your credentials of like, God, this is really something I'm hearing a lot about. It's worth talking about. I mean, I think of the mental health crisis as kind of the boogeyman of the mind in the United States, you know? And it's just prolific. I'm going to rip off a couple stats right now and get your kind of thoughts on that. And then we'll go into your story and kind of how you got to where you are today. Okay. First of all, I don't think people know that there's nearly 60 million U.S. adults. There's like 350 million in the U.S. population that have experienced a mental illness in 2024. That's about 1 in every 5 adults or 11 in every 47 Americans, if you count like teens and children. About just under 6% of adults, about 14.6 million people, experienced serious mental illness in 2024, and that's about 1 out of every 20 adults. People may think that people with severe mental illness are committing crimes, because you see that a lot on Facebook, but people with severe mental illness really are 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than to commit one. Less than probably 4 to 5% of all violence in the U.S. is attributable to mental illness. So it's not as big as we may think, but it's really, if you think about it, people with serious mental illness, they're 10 times more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized because their illness is not identified or addressed. And they're 16 times more likely to be killed in encounters with police than the general population. So there is that. And the last stat I'll leave you with is about youth. Youth and young adults ages 10 to 24 now account for 15% of all U.S. suicides. That's a 52.2% increase since 2000, making suicide the second leading cause of death in that age group. So with that kind of happy opening, Cristine, I'll leave it to you, but what do you...
I hope that's not happy in your world.
Yeah. But does that kind of ring and resonate with you? And
It's staggering how I do. And I guess the question is, and this was a question. So my background, first of all, I'm a recovering addict. And I thought, before the show, you nailed it pretty well. Like, I have these polarities. So growing up, I was a victim of abuse. And then I switched and I became more of an aggressor. Like, my anger came out and I got in a lot of trouble. And so when you talk about the legal things, I certainly wasn't getting in trouble when my predominant symptoms were anxiety and depression. But when I flipped a switch with PTSD, and that will do that to people, you'll see them flip a switch because it's your fight flight system is kind of constantly activated. And, and I just kind of made almost a semi-conscious decision at one point. I was tired of being the victim. And so I'm like, well, what are my options? Maybe I'll start the fights, And so I don't think I'm proud of it, but I I was in a brand new high school and I was the first girl fight.
Really?
It was me and another girl, you know?
All right. Did you win the fight? I guess I should ask her. How did you...
Well, it looked like it because she had braces,
Yeah.
but she got my nose. And so the next day with the black eyes,
Wow.
yeah, she got the trophy.
Wow.
But darn it. But
So you
anyway.
really flipped the script, so to speak. You know, you were bullied. You have kind of a tough childhood, and then you became you decided, hey.
And then I got angry.
Yeah, and then you got into drugs, and
I did.
and married even a drug dealer.
Married my drug dealer.
Yeah, which is it's tough to kind of escape that. And then you went into being a psychic, not a psychic, a psychiatric.
Psychology.
Yeah, into that.
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's in psychology, and I was trying to figure me out. So this was, as a young adult, like I knew I had issues, and I didn't even know how to scratch the surface on that. But I was definitely intrigued when they played Sybil in psychology, high school psychology class. Oh, yeah. And I'm like, oh, multiple personality disorder. That's interesting. So I thought, well, they're out there, these very complex minds. Maybe I can figure mine out. And, my bachelor's in psychology didn't even scratch the surface. But I do remember going through the DSM, I think it was like the 4 at the time or 3 at the time, and looking at the list of personality disorders and thinking there's something there. But it was brushed over in my bachelor's and again, brushed over in my master's later. And so it was not really addressed. And that's where I think I've really developed my specialty, is in understanding personality disorders and the level of complexity, I guess. I can tell you, like, I had a rap sheet by the time I was 18, but my DSM list was much longer. And so by the time,
can you tell us what that stands for?
The DSM is a Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is what is referenced when people get a diagnosis. Yeah. Anxiety, depression have several different codes, and PTSD has a code, and insurance is likely to cover certain codes more than others. They do not like to cover personality disorders. So basically, because of the nature of that system, we don't talk about it. Insurance doesn't cover it. Why go there? There's no money in it. Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's, you mentioned Sybil. I'm old enough to remember when that first came out. That was like The Exorcist on TV. Obviously, how shocking it was. And it was kind of the first time it was creepy. Right. And so, and I have an autistic daughter. So medicine is slow to catch up to what the illness or the disorder is. Right. And I think you going through it found, maybe there were some things in what the treatment was that were helping, but it had a big void or a big gap, correct?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is an Afraid of Nothing paranormal podcast alert.
$10 merch. $10 merch.
That's right, podcast fans. If you go to our website, afraidofnothingpodcast.com, and click on the store tab, you too can find now $10 merch on the website. So not only can you get the great stuff like the hoodies and the t-shirts and the blankets and the glasses, you can also get stickers and bumper stickers and, well, a whole lot more. You need to see it yourself. But just remember this.
$10 merch
is now available at the Afraid of Nothing podcast store. Check it out. And remember, never be afraid to look good.
Well, so let me fill in some of that gap for you. So before I got my master's degree, I worked for at least 10, 12 years in the substance abuse field. So I had, basically before I married the cocaine dealer, I actually did have a spiritual awakening, and I was drug-free while he was still using. And so the spiritual awakening I had is what changed me from the inside out. It brought me to like a life that I completely transformed my path. So when you talk about polarity, 180 degrees, I was flipped around on a different path to, more or less first thing I did was realize, well, this is what I want to do. I want to support this kind of change for people. So I finished off my bachelor's with a double major in social work, and I was able to kind of get into like practicum at a rehab. And then I went to another college where I got a certification in the addiction studies. And while I was at this, it was the U of U, University of Utah. And it was kind of cutting edge, I would have to say, in the 90s, because I was learning about muscle testing. I remember one of our professors brought in, I guess it was done in chiropractics a little bit, but kinesiology or muscle testing, behavioral kinesiology, where she had, students come up to the front of the room and hold a bag of potato chips and a water and a Coke. And they, the ones that were holding the toxic foods, their muscle strength went weak. And, the water and other health promoting things, their muscle strength stayed strong. Wow. And so I was very interested in that. And, and they had a team there. I was a couple who were teaching about personality disorder development. So they're looking at how comorbid these, personality disorders are with addictions and how it seems to settle in based on parenting styles and, other factors. And so I learned more in that 1 year than I can honestly say in the other 6 years or 7 years I did, in the other programs. So there was something about addiction studies that they were uncovering that the mental health field was not even looking at. And part of it is because even now today, one of the strongest interventions is Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a spiritual program. And so why would a spiritual program work for a mental illness? Well, because it's also a spiritual illness. So
I have a bunch of questions for you, by the way, that are off the script. I send questions ahead and I never use the questions I send. So just so you know, it's like I'll try to stay by those. But
okay.
My first question was, what triggered your spiritual awakening? What you said you had that, but what triggered? Where were you? What happened? What caused it?
So there was a couple things going on. One I knew about because it was my experience, and one I found out about later. So my experience is that I'd started into cocaine late 1987, and it was with a dealer, and so we had a large access to it. And so the disease picked up real quick. I'd been using all the other things, marijuana, LSD, alcohol, and and I'd had some issues with some of those substances. They had caused problems. And, in the diagnostic criteria, if a drug causes you a problem and you quit, then you don't have a problem. And so I thought I didn't have a problem because I quit those things that I didn't like. But then I found the thing I liked. And then it became a problem.
Was that cocaine? Or was cocaine the thing that you liked? Or
that was the thing I liked. And based on my chemical deficiencies, if you want to call it that, my chemical imbalances, it was the thing that was that match. They talk about Candace Pert in What the Bleep Do We Know? I don't know if you've heard of that film. Yep. It was a good one, came out, 20 years ago. And she really depicted that really well with peptides and, the lock and the key and the, all those things that happen in the brain. So that was my lock and key. Like that was, and what was interesting is that I was moving into that progression, but then a switch flipped again. We're talking about these, like overnight things. And I was using the substance. I remember it was, it was kind of a version of smoking it. And so it's kind of like the crack sort of thing. And I hadn't ever really gotten it. It was like, why does everybody love this so much? I don't get it. And so something was maybe protecting me. I don't know. But this one night, one of our friends came to the door, and she was one of those cheerleader. I think she literally was a cheerleader in high school, and she was always bubbly. She didn't have that chemical imbalance, and she just was there for the fun. And her personality was not there. Like she was a gray cloud instead of a bright sunshine that night. And I found out that she'd just come from a funeral of a friend of hers who had overdosed. And it was kind of one of those overdose/suicide sort of, they hadn't sorted it. So she came in with that heaviness surrounding her. And, we get into the drug again. And that time it not only clicked, it never left me alone. So later, as I started to trace back, like, what was that? I got a really clear knowing that she had brought an earthbound spirit with her. Huh. The guy never went on to the light. He was clinging to her and then latched onto me as my guess, and so I do think there's a little paranormal in that story, but it explains some things. And later I found out this book had been written by a man talking about near-death experiences. Return from Tomorrow. Does that sound familiar? Richie, I think is the last name.
I've had a bunch of authors on about near-death experiences and people that have had near-death experiences that are being made into films that are great. One was an ice climber, monk.
We love, I love interviews. Yeah. So that was the first one I'd heard of. And he, during his time in spirit form, he entered a bar and he could tell the difference between the actual people sitting at the bar and the earthbound spirits sitting at the bar. Partly because he would watch and the earthbound spirits weren't drinking, they were waiting. And once the person at the bar got a certain level of intoxication, they were unzippable is kind of the word that, it was like they were open to being vicariously, experienced through the earthbounds would enter them and get the drug, get the alcohol, whatever, the buzz. Wow. And so, and it was just really like, oh, wow. I think that's what happened. How did you from that night.
How did you get rid of that? Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but.
Oh, that's a good question, right? So that's part of this whole, these polarities. So from that night, I couldn't refuse the drug. I started losing weight. I started experiencing late stage kinds of symptoms and I couldn't control it. Like I remember I hadn't eaten much. I knew my weight was down and I had to eat. And I made dinner, which I didn't do very often. And then a guy came over with powder. It was actually crank at the time, which that one is like, well, now you're not going to eat for 12 hours, So, and I remember I didn't have my normal capacity to refuse or to think. Like I didn't choose for myself after that.
I want to ask you two other quick questions before I forget them. Your experience with drugs and as a drug counselor, what are your thoughts about marijuana and about ayahuasca?
Oh, okay. So I have a couple of thoughts on, can we add psilocybin in there? It's because I feel like they all kind of group together, okay. But yeah, marijuana, I think it depends on the person. So there's actually some DNA testing you can do. And in your DNA, it can tell you if you have an affinity for a substance or if it's really a bad idea for you. Okay. And there is a genetic marker with marijuana that is very strongly, they're saying like it is leading to psychosis. And so if you have that marker and you use marijuana, you might be fine for a few months or years even. And then like that gene switches, right? And you could be having major mental illness.
See, this is the stuff that should publicize more often. Like you need to get a license to get a gun, or whatever. You need to have a certain background. They should be checking that before you buy your gummies or your marijuana at the dispensaries. Wow.
So I haven't experienced ayahuasca personally to tell you my personal opinion on it. I hear a lot of stories of people that are having awakenings with it. And I don't hear a lot of downside. I think if it's conducted with the right people, with the right intentions and facilitated well, I think it could be an option. And it might have some really cool, very beneficial results.
Okay.
Part of it is it's opening the third eye. So my experience is, and I've done a lot of work in understanding of the third eye, the sixth chakra. And
before I go to that, I want to ask one quick, because this is kind of segue. You do something, you're an integrative mental health.
Integrative, yes. Integrating Western and Eastern.
So maybe that's kind of where you're going anyways, but if you could kind of discuss that. And do a lot of people do that, or are you kind of a pioneer in that?
No, I don't think very many do it.
No. Okay. All right.
I think it's a little more common. I think people have their thing that maybe in their, as a therapist's own journey, they're figuring out they've got to do some somatic work. So somatic work is is part of an integrative model. The idea is that we want to see, I call it the wellness diamond. So there's 4 prongs to the wellness diamond. Physical, which there isn't a lot of physical solutions in the mental health field. You kind of have to step away and get medications. Like hopefully people are getting medications and working with someone who making it more integrative, if you would call it that. But I don't know that medications, I wouldn't call them really integrative. So integrative things in my book would be things like somatic tools, things that are not dependent, don't create a dependency, or that are not outside of our normal ability to really kind of create ourselves. So mindfulness training, or, and definitely nutritional neurochemistry. I'm, all on that. Yeah. And understanding how nutritional supplements and amino acids and even peptides and different things like that we're starting to see more of can be a solution for chemical imbalance, and doing the DNA, looking at what is there. And
you would get along good with my ex-wife because she's very much, I have an autistic daughter. And so when we were very young, she thought we were losing her when she was very young. I have 2 daughters, and one had a sensitivity thing. It took her a while to grow into where she was not comfortable in her skin. She had to have a weighted type of blanket
weighted things. Yep.
Yeah. And the other one seemed to be like dulling and losing her. And so she changed the diet. She got all these supplements, and the counter would be full of all these holistic things. Because it really, she felt was important to clear the fog, to clear the fog of autism. And she was very big on that. And the kids have been, vegan, gluten-free well before it was in probably, oh God, they're 18 and 20 now. That's all, 16.
I started gluten-free really before it was a thing. Yeah, for sure. So the other 4 prongs of the diamond, the other 3 are, one is emotional. And at first I thought, well, this is just emotions. But then later in my training with Quantum University, when I, was studying the quantum layers of who we are, I learned that's actually the vital body. So the vital body will store emotions, and that's our chakras, our meridians, sometimes the auric field. And people who are more intuitive will pick up on that. It's like, and even empathic, individuals will feel like when someone walks in a room, they might be controlling their body language, but still exuding an emotion that people will perceive. And that's coming through that vital body. And also I trained in emotional freedom technique, the original Gary Craig model. And then I developed it, kind of to work even beyond the vital body. And it's, releasing emotion from meridian points. So
you're an empath,
at all work,
right? You're an empath. Are you an empath, or how would
I'm not? I wasn't really? Born that way. So this is where, let me tell you this little piece of my story. So the drug dealer that I, make sound so scary, he was an empath. I was the mean one. I was the one that had more sociopathic tendencies.
Oh, really?
So I'd actually pretty much lost my conscience. I was very detached emotionally, and he came into my life, and then I kind of woke up in, a physical way, and that my brain was stimulated with cocaine, and I felt more. And then I said I was going to throw in psilocybin. So it was actually psilocybin during that last year that promoted, I think, a spiritual awakening. It kind of laid the groundwork for that in a lot of ways. And I'm actually, if anything's to be legalized, I think that one could be. I think it actually has huge potential as an antidepressant that would support, microdosing, obviously, but that could support a more integrative model of holistic change. Because that's when I started to feel is, the combination of those 2 things woke me up emotionally and like kind of put me in a place of connection that I didn't have before that.
So what you're talking about is typical medicine is like the numbing of the symptom, right? Like give them drugs.
Oh, right. I would have a lot of.
And you're like, no, you need to connect with your emotions and you need to control them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, is that kind of the?
Yes, I can't tell you how many clients I had in my practice when I was working in, in private practice, that their goal in treatment was to get off of their antidepressants. And so they wanted to make sure they had enough tools and support. And, I wasn't in a medical position to do that, but I supported the emotional work. And that's typically what they needed to move beyond the patch of an antidepressant.
When I looked at your website, there was this very cool diagram of kind of the frequencies. I know this is part of your frequency formulas,
Yes.
where you start vibrating low, where you're in the drugs and all that, feeling depression and all that stuff, the 100, 200, and then you go up to a certain level. And is 0 point kind of integrated into that as well? Is 0 point part of that frequency?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, let me address this frequency model because I love talking about that. So low frequencies are like shame, fear, guilt, depression, those kinds of things. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the highest of all the negative emotions? Which emotion would be the highest frequency? If any guesses?
I mean, highest in terms of going to the next level of normalcy?
Well, and it's still not above a 200, but it's, higher on the scale than
Guilt?
Some of the really heavy emotions.
Guilt?
What'd you say?
Guilt?
Oh, guilt that's really low. It's right above shame.
Okay.
It's anger.
Anger. Wow.
So anger is a catalyst. And so it was interesting that if I look at my arc you talked about.
Right. That was you and I.
That was me. I had to get angry before I could get worse and then get better.
Interesting. Wow.
And it's like, it was a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough emotion when it's not, part of a personality or constant. Right. Yeah. So people that don't get people who are in victim states, that's typically, something I would encourage them. I would teach them how to get angry, when to get angry, and some of the parameters around that so they could have a breakthrough. So anyway, so mental is another point of that diamond. And if we're looking at the frequency model, so what I kind of found is that at a 200 frequency, people are typically dependent on something. So that's where they're not feeling anything. They're just kind of numb. They're just survival mode kind of stuff. And then a 300 is where you see the heroes. So the heroes are typically your therapists, and you're working and you're doing the deal and you're socially responsible and all these things seem to work. But I had a criminal kind of like, I don't know, wild hair, right? And I found myself teaching a lot of these principles in a jail. And it was while I was teaching that I actually came across the frequency model. And it was interesting because they would provoke really deep questions, and answers. I would have to go home for a week to come back with the answers, for what they were asking. And they ranged, and that was partly like, what is their, why are we doing this? What are the reasons to become a socially responsible person? Because they would kind of point to the guards and say, that's not high frequency. And I'd be like, I can't disagree with you. So I took it to like my own experience partly and my own questions. And what I found is that if the world is made up of only 100 to 300, that's not a world I really wanted to be a part of. Yeah, it's just basically, it's a a circular system that is, kind of dependent on a problem, and a solution only really is semi-effective, so like prison doesn't really work, and so it was like, there's got to be something higher. And that's when I figured out what a 400 frequency looks like. And that is the frequency of emotional, movement and feeling and inner motivation and a passion and a life full of meaning that, like, it's hard still, but it matters. And so I started sharing that with them. And then it took me a little while. I don't know if I was still in the jail when I figured this one out, and teaching this, but I realized that is also a roller coaster. And so the emotional roller coaster, I mean, we see it all the time. We see it in relationships. We see it in jobs. It's like we have good days and bad days. We have finances. Think about the roller coaster of finances, right? So a lot of people can relate to this hope that, like, it's almost like worth it. And then it's hard again. And so it's like, there's got to be something better than that. And that's the 500 frequency.
Unfortunately, as a paranormal podcaster, I'm probably buried in the 200 to 300 frequency range.
If you like fear, I guess that's.
Yeah. Well, I it says afraid of nothing. I'm not really a big afraid of nothing guy. But really, that was because that came about, by the way, because half the people are afraid of death, and the other half have nothing to fear.
Mm-hmm.
I started this whole journey when your first parent dies, it was my mother. It really made me question things and want to talk to people like you or people outside of my narrow vision. So that's where that came from, But so it sounds like the 1 to 300 range is the ego is really heavy on that, focused on me, my problems, poor me.
There's victim ego. There's bullies in there.
But then when you get to above that 400, that's more of the service to others. That's, going outside of yourself. And then eventually you'll talk about the 0 point, thing. But is that accurate in terms of going up?
We're getting there. So, right. Well, so let me talk about that because I was on the verge of this, I think multiple times, and I would get scared. So one of the times I was studying A Course in Miracles, which I now am a huge fan of. Yeah. But for a minute there, I was using the meditations and I started to actually feel like I was shifting into that other realm. Like I perceived an angelic presence. I started kind of like going into deep meditation and feeling like I was leaving my body. Like I was scared from that. That was, and I quit. I put the book away. So I wasn't ready. So the next level, the 600 frequency is, if you look at this, it actually parallels with the chakras. Okay. So I would kind of
say what 500 was. What is 500?
Well, I'll come back to 500. I wasn't ready for 600 because I hadn't done 500. Okay. If that makes sense. So the 600 is more the miraculous, the magical, the mystics.
Yeah.
The 500 is much more stabilized. So it's more of it's consistent. And part of what makes the 500 work is this constancy. It's like the waves and the storm can be going on all over, and there's a stillness within.
I want 500. That's where I want to get.
It's so good. I love 500. Yeah, I can just stay there. You can just stay there.
Yeah.
So I actually got the opportunity to work with a former Buddhist monk. And so here's what the 0 comes in. So the monk mind is the 500. And so when I started, it's Nithya Shanti is his name. And he's got some great stuff out there. He's entertaining. He's young for a monk. And I met him, what was it? 10, 12 years ago. And so he was young, he was like, you're a monk? That doesn't make sense. Anyway, so he was in his 30s probably. And he ended up in my little town of Cache Valley. And I ran into actually a 12-step
up there. That's like, it's like such a pin on a map type of thing. How did he end up?
It is. Well, there was just a small little congregation, and he ended up, he was supporting this congregation of this Sangha, and he had trouble with, it was kind of like supposed to just be a pass through, but his visa wouldn't renew and he was stuck.
Oh.
Or he had to work with his visa anyway. So he ended up being here for like 3 months. Wow. And so I actually ran into my 12-step sponsor, who had gone to follow Thich Nhat Hanh. And so this is where kind of the spiritual journey, it was like, I was moving into something even, back when I'd been doing 12-step programs and working with addiction recovery that I just kind of built on. And she was ahead of me and had found this next piece of the journey. And so she told me there's a monk in my basement, which will be a book title coming soon. And I was like, oh, wow, I need to know about this. And so I was, I was Christian and I just couldn't see myself like going to a congregation with Buddhism. And so I set it up as consultations. So I went in my first session with him. And here's what ties in with your podcast. He asked me, tell me about your greatest fear. That's what he said. So my greatest fear, and I knew what it was, which was interesting. I said, it's that I would cease to exist.
Yeah, I think I would have that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's different than death. I kind of knew, like I'd watched episodes of Medium for, several times through, I was like, I get that there's something on the other side, but the idea of nothingness, it was like a black hole. And I was always afraid of black holes as a child. So it was just something that was very intimidating. But his answer to me was really interesting. Got definitely a 500 frequency answer. He said, if there is no you because you have ceased to exist, then what is there to be afraid of? There is no you to fear.
Yeah.
To have fear, it's like, oh, wow, that's actually, wow. And it was just like a freeing moment, like just a little shift happened where I realized something, he was walking me into something that was peaceful. That's how it felt.
See, that doesn't help me though. I would be a selfish, egotistical person, and even though I'm far from perfect, being not me anymore, even though you could become, and you'll get to it, 0 point, become part of something more, universal. I think a lot of people have that. We're so, do you want to show us, some of the people I talk to are like pet psychics, right? And they talk about pets when they pass. They're not afraid. They're, they don't, they love to be with their masters, but they kind of leap across to the other side. There's no fear. There's no clinging to materiality, right? Because they have this pain and they leap across. But humans, and my mother, she had Alzheimer's and she was not being fed for the last 7 weeks and really it was really frail and at her weakest. Every breath was a struggle, but she fought like hell for 7 days. And then finally she did pass, so humans cling on to something that is probably we shouldn't, and I think a lot of us are like that.
We do cling. And that is definitely a Buddhist principle of, we cling. And the peace comes from releasing that. So, well, the 0 point, this is interesting. So I met with him. We did some sessions together. I started meditating. And then he went back to India. And I kind of went back to my old ways. So I, was back in this, working till midnight. And, and I was trying to put on a big integrative mental health conference. And it was stressful. And so my whole system was off. And I ate something at midnight, which my body was like, oh, we're not going to handle that. And I went into an allergic reaction. So this allergic reaction, and it actually happened before that. And so my body had kind of it was a coping of some sort. But I would typically pass out along with all the other symptoms of anaphylaxia. And so I passed out, but usually it's like, I would experience this, and I'd passed out many times in my life. They call it fight, flight, freeze, and faint. I was a fainter. So I'd done it many times, and I'd always go to the darkness, and then my consciousness would find me and we'd come back. This time it didn't happen. So this time I remember my consciousness didn't find me.
Wow.
So it was, and I was in a semi-coma for 3 hours.
My goodness. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was your respiratory, your breathing fine, but you were just kind of...
I was alive, but I was gone.
Was someone with you when that happened, or did someone find you?
Well, I was alone in a bathroom at home, and I tell people, it's like I wasn't hovering on the ceiling. I wasn't, exploring. I had not, my spirit was not elsewhere. It was gone. But when my body came back, it was almost like I wasn't with it either. And I almost, it's like part of me could be there enough to just at least make a guttural noise. And it was like 3 a.m. And my husband and my daughter found me and carried me to bed. And for the next day, I more or less had to bring back the ability to speak, to walk.
Kind of like a stroke, like a mini stroke almost, or?
I don't know. I don't know that there's a medical term for it. Yeah, I don't know what it was, other than I think it was a 0. There was my 0 point.
Wow.
So what happens in the 0 point, and I've studied this, and and it was before I met with the monk, and I had this experience before I enrolled in Quantum University, but I believe it was that same spring that my consciousness said, now you got to find the rest of it, because now you've seen the 0. And so in quantum physics, the 0 point field is like a vacuum where all the energy's gone, everything's out. Okay. So there's a nothingness, right? And what's interesting is that, so I had a Zen master a couple years later ask me to explain, the 0 point field. It was actually after I finished my studies with Quantum University. And I said, okay, he says, what's the difference between the 0-point field and the unified field? And I actually had an answer I didn't know I had. And so I explained, well, the 0-point field is like a vacuum, right? And so a vacuum still has, it's a container. And so the unified field, there's no container. There's no separation of nothingness and everything else. It's just everything else.
So which is higher on the frequency, 0-point or the unified?
Well, it depends on, well, here's a couple things I'll share with you. So I believe there is an incredibly high frequency with intention. So that's the answer. It's what is the intention. So intention moves through both, this 0-point field and this, and especially the unified field. So if you want to study this more, I found Dr. Frank Kenslow speaks about quantum entrainment. It is the ability. So entanglement is chaos or not. You don't know what it's going to be because you haven't set the intention. Entrainment is intention oriented, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So he's done this work with this allness, this unified field, and has brought healing intention to it. And he's written a book called The Secret of Instant Healing. So very high frequency.
And I'm sure this is a wrong analogy, but entrainment, I'm here with you, both intentionally. We've decided to be here tonight and talk, while entanglement is a world that has effects on us that we don't realize. I go out and I get some alcohol and I get in a car accident,
Well, let's keep going because, when we talk about these parallels, obviously 600 frequency is a cleared version of third eye type awareness, influence. But that is not always what is going on with the third eye. The third eye can be very polarized. And so this is where, like the movie Sixth Sense, right? Okay. So you got this little boy. I mean, he's this pure little vessel, but he's been, I guess put into this world of dark and light. And fear is part of his experience of darkness. And so, until he starts to see what's around him with either neutrality or love, like it's the vibe, right? The vibration of love is, and higher peace and that type of thing are the things that will shift perception, literally, to where we start to see what could be negative as part of a wholeness. Which, you look at the yin yang, the Tao Te Ching symbol, whatever the Tao symbol is more or less, it's both. We're here in a mix of dark and light, and it's part of a whole experience.
So after 600, 700, is it still in hundreds? Do you go up before you get to, what are the next ladders?
So before I discovered Dr. Hawkins' scale, I was actually given a model that was 7 levels.
Okay.
And so it was basically 7 levels of progression. So I just kind of stick with the 7-level model because that's as much as I can wrap my head around.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and I didn't even see this in the beginning, is it does parallel with the 7 chakras. And so if you look at a 700 frequency tying in with the crown chakra is our union point with the divine, really. And so if we can channel that pure light and love, that moves us into that 700 frequency.
So spiritually, how would you define yourself after you've gone through this kind of learning and reawakening and re-evolving yourselves? Spiritually, where are you today? Before we get into some dark stuff in a minute, but spiritually.
Okay, I'm very eclectic. Okay. So I've managed to keep this. I call it my pie.
You're integrative.
So you're
integrative spiritually, right?
Yes, I am very integrative. So I've got pieces of my pie that are just kind of traditional Christian I grew up with, definitely non-denominational Christian. I love some of the K-Love kind of music and the vibe from that. And then I've got the Buddhism over here, and I've done some study of Kabbalah and Kundalini yoga and, definitely, and I'm very interested in Judaism. I dive into that sometimes. So yeah, there's so much that I open up to, I guess. And I feel like it's parts of me all being facets, you could say, I guess. I kind of see myself as more the diamond in the, I have to be polished. Definitely a lot of ego work.
I guess a while ago was like they're all different dimensions of heaven, and it's real based. It's almost like the world, where there's a part of the world that's Islam, there's a part of the world that's Buddhist, it's a part, there's all these different layers of it, and it's really kind of you are directed to where your life path has taken you. I'm giving a very bad overview of what that was, but I remember it was very much about heaven is not just meeting Jesus or Saint Peter at the gates and then meeting Jesus and it's one realm. It's actually a lot of interconnected realms was what he was talking about, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you are in a very good spot today. Is it safe to say that, or what? Are you, as you've kind of had this personal growth, you're in a very good spot spiritually?
I'm still getting polished. I mean, yeah. I mean, I could focus on the facets that are polished and everything's working. And I like to look at raising frequency in 5 life areas. And so, yeah, so it's not like one like frequency that I live in. I've got, a fluctuating frequencies with different life areas. So, you've got your physical health. I think it's pretty good for me. And mental, emotional is actually really good for me. Financial fluctuates a little. We've got the spiritual, which I actually have spent less time and energy on. Relationships is a tough one. Like that one's still complex.
Well, you're married and you're still married, right? Accurate to say?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's great.
Third marriage.
Yeah. I don't think I'm going to survive. I mean, I'm older than you. I don't think it's like for me. My dad had like 60 years with my mom. It was great and everything. So maybe, I don't know if you believe in reincarnation, but maybe the next life, who knows? But
yes, definitely archetypes. It's kind of at least what I can call it. And yeah.
So now that you've taken all this way up to feeling good about love and consciousness, I'm going to bring it down about possession, because you mentioned before we got on this that you throughout your life had a couple, we talked about, and I think we've already had a bunch of paranormal connections, quite frankly, in this discussion, but you talked about that you had personally been possessed. And I was curious, is it okay to talk about that now as we near the end of this, or is that just kind of a negative place, not worth going? You tell me.
It's interesting because, so I'll share that the other thing I was so afraid of before, way before the monk, was mental illness. So as a substance abuse counselor, I worked in a facility that was next door to the psychiatric ward. Okay. And I was good with what was going on in the addiction world. And it was like a locked door, literally just between the two. Yeah. And sometimes we would hear the howling and the sounds of the mentally ill and tortured, right? The mentally tortured. And that scared the shit out of me. And so I had not, at that point in time, had not entered into my own psychiatric journey. So within about 2 years of that, I had my first bipolar episode and psychotic break. So I didn't go to a hospital. It was kind of managed by family, and I figured out it was a reaction to an antidepressant I was taking. So I was able to just quit the antidepressant and thought I was fine. And I was, until I went into my master's program and got a divorce the same year. And, it just got really complicated and I broke again. And so what I started to realize is that I had not developed something, or there was maybe a purpose in me exploring this side of mental illness personally. I thought I was going to get kicked out of my program because I actually missed finals when I was hospitalized once. And so it was really like quite a journey for me to go in and talk to my professor and say, I'm bipolar and I was in, the hospital, and she didn't kick me out. So I figured out that maybe I was still going to be okay. But through those psychotic episodes, there were times, and I would get to this threshold where I would lose, kind of like that incident with the drugs, where I wasn't in charge of me anymore. And
who was in charge? Yeah. Could you feel another presence talking to you, or it was just something that you?
Yeah, there were entities. I remember one night in the hospital, so I hadn't slept. So part of it was like the sleep deprived psychosis. And I was lying in bed in a hospital bed, and I had this kind of, lucid dream of, these are like basketball teams. So it was like I was on the light. Well, I had to choose a side. So that's what I figured out about my bipolar disorder is some of this was on a soul level.
Wow.
I had to really choose a side. Like I dabbled in both.
We
And
all have to do that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
There's the wolf in all of us, right? Yeah, that's amazing. Wow.
yeah,
And did that happen a
But-
couple times or what? Or did it,
it's happened multiple times. Like I've had 7 or 8 of these.
and did it happen when
And
you were in your 30s or what, when did it happen?
Most of it was in my 30s. And then I had a couple incidents, 2020. And, that was just a weird time for a lot of people. But for me, it was like there was a medication that I was missing. And it's almost like I had to be put through that experience to get everything dialed in. And so when I found that, and it took a couple shots, it was like, oh, this solves so many problems for me. And it was kind of more on the natural side. And so it was interesting that it worked, and it took that much to find it. And I thank God, that was for me part of a spiritual journey, part of that physical. Oh, we didn't get to the fourth part of the diamond is spiritual. Right. And so what I found is that when I tune into a spiritual solution, or I allow some of these spiritual experiences to work through me and with me and surrender and, and clean up the mess, whatever that looks like, that I will be given a gift in it. And some of it is spiritual gifts.
Wow.
as
Ayahuasca
well.
might be a real trip for you because you've experienced.
I probably won't use it.
Yeah, I was going to say probably not.
I've done
because
that.
It's like you're already doing a lot of stuff.
Kind of done that.
So I'm glad we ended up on the spiritual. So was it almost like with the possession thing, like sleep paralysis, that once you've been through it, you knew that you could get out of it? And so the more episodes you had, it was very scary, but you knew you could get out of it? Or were they all equally frightening?
They varied, for sure. They varied.
Okay.
And it must have strengthened me or, been part of my journey. And there's this movie called Crazy Wise, is more or less about the journey of finding solutions for mental illness that are not medical. They are spiritual. They're, it's like in other cultures, when someone starts to have these experiences like I'm describing, they're placed on a spiritual path and they start working with the shaman of the tribe, and they know what that looks like and in the gifts that are part of that. And our culture just hasn't created that well at all, like if at all.
Except for you have a website and you're able to help.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Let's get that. It's a good place to wrap it up. Let's talk about what you offer at your website and how people, when and if they should contact you, and what is on their website that they should look at and consider before reaching out.
Yes. Well, so I tried to make it kind of simple to start with. There's a few different freebies. You can look at 10waysbook.com for understanding brain chemistry a little bit. And that's, just kind of a series of information that goes with the book, 10 Ways to Balance Your Brain Chemistry. There's also, a little bit, it goes a little deeper in there. It's like, there's so much that one of the things I offer in my paid programs is Frequency School. And like people that really want to understand this, it's a great, curriculum with understanding like each of these levels more and personal experience with how to move through it and where you're at and, what's next.
Self-guided courses, or are you with them?
Yeah, they're self-guided. And then I do offer, I have some practitioners I've trained in Point Meridian, and I make that very affordable for people to access that. And, it's similar to, what you would maybe spend on mental health therapy, but definitely works, in a really powerful way. And so there's a variety of things that I say, go explore CristineHull.com. And the name, if you're listening, is there's no H in Cristine. So it's CristineHull.com. So freebies and my story. Put my story on there.
Yeah, your story is amazing. Any books you want to point them to in particular? Would they be on your website? Would they be on Amazon?
So, Being at Zero is the one that I talk about that experience.
Or what is it right back there?
Oh yeah, because it's a memoir anthology. Have you ever heard of a combination of those two? So I tell the story of meeting my current husband, who's his story's in there as well, and he's had his own quantum awakening. I also have Vinnie Tolman's story in there, and he's had a radical near-death experience.
Wow.
But I talk about the zero and how it has become part of a practice, so I developed quantum wholeness meditation, and I also have a community that we meditate regularly and study A Course in Miracles and do our work to be free of the ego's, I guess, lower frequencies. So
that's excellent. It's a great conversation. I misled you. I didn't ask you any of the questions that were on the questions I sent you ahead of time.
That's okay.
And we went over 50 minutes, but anyways, we're at 53. But thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Cristine Hull. It's a very, illuminating conversation, and so much more to untap. And I encourage everyone to go to your website. We'll certainly put that in the show notes. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.